There is some utility of the Memorandum of Understanding in that it has stopped high intensity conflict. It allowed, for a time at least, some of the goods to transfer, and it started negotiations again. But other than that, the Memorandum of Understanding was a disaster when it was written. It was a tremendous diplomatic victory for Iran.
First, though, tensions between the US and Iran are escalating as President Trump threatens to attack Iran again tonight. Talking to the Ukrainian President, Vladimir Zelensky, he had this to say.
They are behaving very badly, as they have for 47 years. And, we hit them hard last night after they launched a couple of, you don't have to know about this, you got stuff on your mind, but they launched a couple of drones and one rocket, one missile, and at ships, because they were in the strait, which they have every right to be. And so we hit them very hard last night, very, very hard. Probably hit them hard again tonight. I'll give them a little warning, we're going to hit them hard tonight.
Well, the warning follows his earlier remarks at the NATO summit that the ceasefire with Iran was definitely over.
To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. I'll speak to our negotiators. They want to negotiate. They're good people. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. But they have to come back to me.
Well, all this follows an exchange of fire between the two countries overnight. Oil prices inevitably have surged today, hitting $76 a barrel for the first time in a fortnight. We can now get the view of a man called Will Wechsler, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Obama and Senior Director of Middle East Programs at the Atlantic Council. Mr. Wechsler, thank you for sparing us a few minutes of your time this afternoon. So can you explain this? The ceasefire is over, that's pretty certain, but the talks can and will continue. How is that possible?
It's possible because the conflict that we're seeing right now, the low intensity conflict, comes directly from the Memorandum of Understanding that was reached. The problem with that is that Iran believes that the Memorandum of Understanding gave it Hormuz. Donald Trump does not agree with that interpretation of the Memorandum of Understanding. So what you've been seeing ever since is Iran trying to enforce its new normal on the Strait of Hormuz, trying to take a series of actions that would force the rest of the world to behave as though they recognize Iran's newly privileged position. And the United States is not willing to give that to Iran. So this low intensity conflict will continue, but the negotiations will still continue to see if the ceasefire can be continued.
But if the two sides can't agree on what the Memorandum of Understanding is about, what is it worth?
Well, there is some utility of the Memorandum of Understanding in that it has stopped high intensity conflict. It allowed, for a time at least, some of the goods to transfer, and it started negotiations again. But other than that, the Memorandum of Understanding was a disaster when it was written. It was a tremendous diplomatic victory for Iran. With Donald Trump's signature, gave up a great number of U.S. national security interests that had been defined for decades at a time. One of the worst things that can happen right now is for us to go back into a high intensity war. But the second worst thing that can happen for us right now is to have a set of negotiations conclude with a treaty that formalizes everything that's in the Memorandum of Understanding, which would be a disaster.
So the Iranian people, I'm sure many people listening just feel immense sympathy for them. There are so many people outside Iran who claim to speak for them. But we, on the whole, we have no idea what the majority of people in Iran are thinking or what they want. Do you have any idea?
The real answer is no, because the United States doesn't have an embassy in Iran, hasn't since the Iranian regime came to power, taking our people in the embassy hostage in 1979. But more than that, other countries that have embassies in Iran similarly are limited in their real knowledge about the Iranian opposition. There is clearly, as we saw from the numbers of people that came out to the Ayatollah Khamenei's funeral,
Yeah.
millions of Iranians who support the regime. There are also very clearly millions and millions of Iranians that oppose the regime and have taken every opportunity over the last 15 years to rise up against the regime. As you noted, they just did so in January, which set off the whole series of events leading us to today. And probably 20,000 people, it's safe to say, were killed in just 2 days by the Iranian regime. And that's a faster rate of death than we've seen in any other conflict in the Middle East, or frankly around the world in the last number of decades. It's an incredibly fast rate of butchery. And that's what the Iranian regime has done to its people just this year.
Donald Trump's use of language, I mean, it's idiosyncratic, isn't it, by diplomatic standards. Calling the Iranian leadership scum, that's today, though, because a couple of weeks ago he was claiming that they were, well, the sort of people he could do business with. It was a whole new bunch of people at the top, and they were talking a sort of sense.
Yes, Donald Trump has found what most American presidents have found is that the search for moderates within this regime says more about American dreams than about the realities in Tehran. No one can defend Donald Trump's language or should defend Donald Trump's language. It's wholly undisciplined and undiplomatic. But he is not wrong if he has come to the conclusion that this group of leaders in Iran will continue to behave the same way that they've behaved for decades, which is to constantly try to create the new normal, which they're able to project their power against all of their neighbors in the region and against U.S. and European interests in the region in a way that doesn't actually reflect traditional Iranian interests, but it reflects the interests of this regime. This problem, unfortunately, will not be resolved until this regime leaves. And that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon.
No, I mean, indeed, if anything, the regime seems more entrenched. But I wonder, are there, or are you aware of any significant divisions within the Iranian leadership?
There are always divisions within any government. There are always differences of opinion about tactics, even operations, but the strategic direction of this regime is very clear, and that there has been no change of that strategic direction. In fact, they feel vindicated, but despite the damage that they have received in this war, despite the fact of their economy, despite the struggles of the Iranian people, they feel vindicated by this war. They feel that they were unjustly attacked. They feel that they came out of this war in a strategically stronger position, given their ability to close their fist on Hormuz anytime that they want. They are not going to give that up.
And meanwhile, the rest of the world suffers, including notably some extremely poor countries who are really bearing the brunt. We're likely to feel the effects perhaps in the autumn and winter. And there are any number of sailors trapped on vessels in the strait. It's all pretty grim, really, isn't it?
It is indeed. And let's not forget, this is an international waterway. This does not belong to Iran. This does not belong to Oman. This does not belong to any country that is abutting an international waterway. This has been at the core of U.S. policy in the Middle East since Jimmy Carter created the Carter Doctrine and Reagan created a Reagan corollary to support the Carter Doctrine. This is a bipartisan approach of the United States for decades to support freedom of navigation through international waterways. Iran is a complete outlier in the world in their behavior right now. And the real people, as you say, that will be damaged by this are all the people in the poorer countries of the world that are going to have a harder time getting or affording the energy that they need to go about their lives.
But I think you have written extensively about this, and there's at least one article of yours in which you say that Donald Trump has been right on Iran more often than his critics care to admit. Was he right in the first place to go along with Netanyahu and start all this?
No, he was right on a variety of factors. He was right in understanding the threat from Iran. He was right in going to war a year ago in the 12-day war to go against the Iranian nuclear program, which was a nuclear weapons program. He was wrong in this war. This was a completely misguided war, and although we love to blame Benjamin Netanyahu, this one is on Donald Trump. This started when Donald Trump tweeted himself into a hole in January by declaring a red line that he against the Iranian government's dealing with their protesters that we were in no position to enforce, by telling Iranian protesters to rise up, that help was on the way, and no help was on the way. After that point, he sent U.S. forces forward. At that point, we were going to war because there were only three options. The United States was going to back down, which wasn't going to happen. Iran was going to give him what he wanted in terms of the nuclear deal, which wasn't going to happen, or we were going to go to war. This was very predictable starting in January.
Thank you for talking to us this afternoon. Will Wechsler, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence under President Obama and Senior Director of Middle East Programmes at the Atlantic Council.